Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on something you've been wanting to explore. Getting things done. GTD.
Mm-hmm.
You've sent over a ton of stuff on this, a whole productivity system. It even includes David Allen's book.
Oh, nice.
And it seems like what we're after is, stress-free productivity, maybe even a mind like water, as Allen puts it.
Right.
Sounds pretty zen.
It does have that zen quality to it, yeah. And you're right, it's, GTD is more than just like a to-do list thing.
Right.
It's really a whole way of thinking about how to capture, process, and then ultimately decide what to do with all the stuff that's demanding our attention.
Okay, I'm intrigued already. One of the first things that really stood out to me from the book is this whole idea that our minds are just terrible at holding all the things we try to cram in there.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, it's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle or something.
That's a great image, and Alan really drives that point home. He says that our brains, they're designed for having ideas, not for storing them.
Oh, interesting.
So if you try and keep everything up there in your head, well, that's what leads to that feeling of overwhelm, like your mental RAM is just completely overloaded.
Ugh, tell me about it. Some days, I swear I can't even remember what I had for breakfast, let alone all the things I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
But GTD, it's saying that we can offload all that mental clutter.
Yeah,
right.
The whole point is to move all those commitments, all those ideas out of your head and into some kind of trusted system.
Okay.
And this frees up so much mental space for thinking, for being creative, and actually getting things done. It's like having a personal assistant for your brain.
So it's like we're building an external brain to take care of all that.
Mm-hmm.
And that then leads to that mind like water idea, that state of calm, clarity.
Right, exactly. So by getting all those open loops, those unmade decisions, all that stuff out of our heads, we're essentially, we're eliminating all those little nagging voices that are contributing to stress and overwhelm. We're just creating space to, focus on the present moment and engage with our work and our lives just more effectively.
That sounds amazing. But if I'm honest, I'm a little skeptical too. Isn't breaking everything down into these tiny little next actions just going to create like even more tasks, make things even more overwhelming?
I can see why you'd think that.
Yeah.
That's a common concern and a good question.
Yeah.
But the thing is, clarifying those next actions, it actually reduces that decision fatigue you're talking about.
Okay.
It's about making those decisions up front so you don't have to keep reevaluating what needs to be done. It's like preloading the decision-making gun so that when it's time to take action, you can just pull the trigger.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. So it's not about creating more work.
Right.
It's about front-loading that whole decision-making process.
Exactly, and it's even backed up by research into things like the Zeigarnik effect. It shows that unfinished tasks, they really tend to linger in our minds and just create a lot of mental tension.
Oh, wow.
By clarifying those next actions, you're essentially closing those loops and freeing up a ton of mental bandwidth.
That is so interesting. I never thought of it that way. So we're kind of like tricking our brains into relaxing by giving them a clear path forward.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal here.
It's about creating a sense of control, a sense of clarity.
Yeah.
Now, to get to that point, GTD, it outlines a 5-step workflow. I know you know the basics, but let's dive in a little deeper to how these steps actually work together to achieve that mind-like water state.
Okay, sounds good. So the first step is capture, right? This is where we gather up all those tasks and ideas and commitments that are just kind of swirling around in our heads.
Right.
But what's interesting here is that GTD, it isn't just about like capturing the big things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's also about those seemingly insignificant things that can just really clutter up your mental space.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's those, random thoughts that pop into your head like, oh, I got to pick up milk on the way home, or I need to email so-and-so, or even, what is that weird sound my car's making?
Oh, yeah.
It's those little things that can really drain our mental energy.
Yeah.
GTD says get it all out, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem.
It's like decluttering your mind, getting rid of all those mental cobwebs so you can think straight.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads us to the second step. Clarify.
Okay.
This is where we actually make decisions
Yeah.
about all those things we've captured.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it even actionable? And if so, what's the very next step? And here's where we can get into some of the nuances of GTD, like that 2-minute rule.
Ah, the 2-minute rule. So how often do you actually follow that one? Because I'll be honest, I'm terrible at it. Sometimes it just feels easier to like add it to the to-do list than to just take 2 minutes and do it.
I think we all struggle with that sometimes.
Yep.
It's that resistance to switching gears,
Yeah.
even for a tiny task.
Right.
But the interesting thing about that 2-minute rule is that it's not just about efficiency.
Okay.
It's also about building momentum and just breaking that procrastination habit.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. So it's like those tiny little wins can actually have a ripple effect
Right.
on our motivation and our productivity.
Exactly. By knocking out those small tasks immediately, we're creating this sense of accomplishment and building momentum towards tackling those bigger, more challenging things.
Okay. This is starting to feel like a mental game as much as a productivity system. It's like we're retraining our brains to focus and actually take action. Okay, so we've clarified what comes next.
Next is organize.
Okay.
This is where we categorize all those clarified actions and we put them into our trusted system, whether that's lists, a calendar, project files, or a combination of all those things.
So we're basically creating a filing system for our lives. But here's where I get a little tripped up. How do we actually organize all those actions in a way that makes sense? Like, are there specific categories we should be using?
Well, Alan does suggest some specific categories like calls and at computer and errands, things like that. But the real magic of GTD is that it's so customizable. The key is to create a system that works for you based on your work style, your tools, and your own unique needs.
So it's like building a bespoke suit for your productivity. It's not one size fits all.
Exactly.
It's about tailoring the system to your unique measurements.
Precisely. And once you have that system in place, then it's time for the next step. Reflect.
Reflect. This is where that weekly review comes into play, right?
Yeah.
The one that everyone raves about. But I'll admit, I often skip. It just feels like another task on an already overloaded to-do list.
I think we've all been there. The weekly review, it can feel a bit daunting.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's not just about checking off completed tasks.
Okay.
It's about recalibrating your whole system and just making sure that everything is still aligned with your priorities and your goals. Think of it as a mental decluttering session for your whole GTD system.
Okay, that does make it sound a little less intimidating.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, isn't the real magic of GTD actually in the doing?
Right.
All of this capturing and organizing, it's great, but at some point we have to take action. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to that final step, engage.
Okay.
This is where we move from planning to execution, making choices about what to tackle based on our context, the time we have, our energy levels. But even here, there are nuances and strategies that can make a big difference in how we approach our work and ultimately how effective we are.
Okay, so we've captured all these tasks, we've clarified those next actions, and we've built a system to organize it all. But then how do we actually choose what to focus on in the moment? It still feels like there's just a million things competing for our attention.
Right, and that's where the engage step gets really interesting. Because it's not just about, blindly following a to-do list,
right.
GTD. It actually gives us this framework for making conscious, informed decisions about how to, engage with our work.
So it's like we've built this amazing race car, but now we need to learn how to actually drive it.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And Alan, he gives us this threefold model for making those in-the-moment choices.
Okay.
First, you got to consider the context, right? Where are we? What resources do we have available?
So like if I'm at my desk with my computer, I tackle those tasks on my, at computer list.
Yeah.
But if I'm out running errands, I'd focus on those, errands.
Right, exactly. Then you got to think about, how much time you have. You've got 5 minutes before a meeting, maybe knock out a quick phone call. But if you have a 2-hour block, well, maybe that's when you tackle that project that needs, deep focus.
Yeah. Time is definitely a factor. It's so frustrating when you start something ambitious and then you have to abandon it halfway through because something else comes up.
Exactly. And then finally, GTD wants us to really pay attention to our energy levels.
Oh, okay.
Are we feeling energized and focused? Or are we, kind of drained and distracted?
Ooh, that's a big one. Some days, I swear, I'm running on fumes by lunchtime. So GTD is really saying that, we should be factoring in our mood.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about aligning those tasks with your energy levels, feeling mentally sharp. Great, tackle that complex problem.
Oh.
But if you're feeling drained, well, maybe that's the time for those, mindless admin tasks.
I love that. It's like we're giving ourselves permission to work with our energy, not against it. But all this talk about choices and energy, it makes me think about something else that the book discusses. The idea of natural planning.
Oh, yeah, that's a really fascinating part of GTD.
It is.
It's about tapping into the way our brains, they naturally plan and problem solve.
Can you remind me, like, what are those 5 phases of natural planning again?
Sure. So it starts with, an intention. There's a desire for something to be different.
Okay.
And then we visualize the outcome, right? Imagine what success would look like, what it would feel like.
Okay.
And that leads to, brainstorming, where we generate ideas and gather information. And then we organize those ideas. So we're creating a structure, a plan.
Okay.
And then finally, of course, we take action, putting that plan into motion.
It sounds so simple when you break it down like that.
I know, right? And it really is. It's a process that we naturally go through for so many things in our lives. GTD just brings conscious awareness to it.
Right.
And it gives us a framework for applying it to our work and our goals.
So cool. It's like we're hacking our own brains to be more effective. But I have a question. How does natural planning actually work for those bigger, more complex goals? It seems easy enough for making dinner or planning a weekend trip. But what about, projects that might span weeks or even months?
That's a great question. And that's where that emphasis on project support material comes in.
Okay.
It's about, capturing and organizing all the information, resources, ideas, all the stuff related to a project, and doing it in a way that supports our thinking.
So instead of having like random notes and emails and files scattered everywhere, we're creating this like centralized hub for each project.
Exactly. And it could be a physical folder. It could be a, digital note-taking app, or even a dedicated whiteboard. The point is just to gather everything related to that project, put it in one place.
Okay.
So we can easily access and review it whenever we need to.
It's like we're creating a war room for each project.
Yeah.
But I can see how all that project material, like, that could easily become overwhelming in itself. It's like, how do we keep ourselves from getting lost in a sea of notes and ideas?
That's a good point. And that's where, those brainstorming and organizing phases of natural planning, that's where they really come into play.
Okay.
It's about using tools like mind maps, outlines, or even, just good old-fashioned sticky notes to capture and categorize all those ideas.
So it's not just about, collecting the information. It's about actually processing it, making sense of it.
Yeah. Exactly. And that processing, it can be incredibly powerful. It can help us to identify patterns, uncover hidden connections, and even generate new ideas that we might have otherwise missed.
It's like those aha moments you get when you're putting together a puzzle and suddenly, everything clicks into place.
Right.
But all this talk about natural planning and processing, it makes me wonder, is there a connection between GTD and all those like productivity hacks based on, cognitive science?
That's a really good observation. And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
GTD, it's deeply rooted in an understanding of how our brains actually work.
Oh, wow.
It's not just a set of random tips and tricks, It's a system that's actually designed to work with our cognitive strengths and compensate for our weaknesses.
Okay. I'm all ears. Tell me more about this brain hacking aspect of GTD.
Well, one of the key concepts here is distributed cognition. And that's basically the idea that we can use external tools, right, to support our thinking and decision-making. So, think of it like this. Our brains, they have this limited working memory, right?
Right.
So we need to offload some of that cognitive load onto external systems. And that's, in a nutshell, that's what GTD is all about.
So it's like we're extending our mental capacity by using these tools like lists and calendars and project files. It's almost like having these external hard drives for our brains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're essentially outsourcing some of those mental tasks to our trusted system. And that frees up so much mental space for that higher level thinking and problem solving.
Like we're giving our brains an upgrade, better hardware, better software. But if GTD is so deeply connected to how our minds work, why do so many people have a hard time sticking with it? What's the disconnect there?
You've hit on a really important point. GTD it's a powerful framework, but it's not magic. It does take effort. It takes consistency, and it takes that willingness to really adapt the system to your own, individual needs and habits.
It's like having a gym membership, right? Just
Yeah.
signing up doesn't make you fit. You got to show up and actually do the work. But speaking of work, this whole conversation is really highlighting, just how much stress and frustration comes from like all those unclarified, unorganized commitments that are, bouncing around in our heads.
And that's really where the power of GTD lies. It's not just about productivity, right? It's
Yeah.
about creating a sense of peace, a sense of clarity. And you get there by getting all those open loops out of your head and into that trusted system.
You've mentioned this idea of broken agreements with ourselves a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that a bit more? Like, what are those, and how does GTD help us avoid them? Because I'm starting to see how this all ties into the stress reduction piece.
Yeah, so it's the idea that, well, every incomplete task, every unmade decision, it creates a kind of, psychic weight, even if it's something small.
Oh, okay.
It's like having, a bunch of tabs open in your brain. It's just draining our energy, making it harder to focus.
It's like when you're trying to have a conversation, but there's that song stuck in your head and you can't quite remember all the words. It's so distracting.
And those broken agreements, they can lead to, that feeling of overwhelm, to anxiety, and even to procrastination, right? Because we start to avoid those tasks because we associate them with that negative feeling of not being finished.
So GTD is about, clearing out all that mental clutter and giving ourselves permission to actually relax and focus on what we're doing. It's like giving our brains a spa day.
I like that. And it's not just about, individual peace of mind. This whole concept of broken agreements, it also plays out in our relationships and in organizations.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about being organized with our own stuff, but also about being clear and accountable in how we, interact with others.
Exactly. So those unclear commitments, those, unspoken expectations, those missed deadlines, they can all lead to so much tension and conflict. And GTD, it gives us a framework for communication and collaboration that can help us avoid all that.
It's like we're creating this shared language for getting things done, both individually and collectively. This is starting to feel less like a productivity system and more like a philosophy for living a more, a more intentional, more harmonious life.
I love that. It's about, aligning our actions with our values, with our goals.
Yeah.
And creating a life that feels more authentic, more fulfilling.
Okay, so we've explored the philosophy, those 5 steps, the power of focusing on outcomes, those fascinating tiers of mastery. We even got into the cognitive science behind it all. And I gotta admit, I'm feeling pretty inspired, but where do we go from here? What's the next step for someone who's ready to jump into this whole GTD world?
Well, that's the exciting part. The journey is just beginning. And remember, GTD is a practice, right? It's not a one-time fix.
No.
The more you experiment, the more you'll discover what works best for you.
It's like we've given you a taste. It's your turn to go create your own culinary masterpiece.
That's a great way to put it. And as you embark on this GTD adventure, remember that ultimate goal. It's about achieving that mind-like water state.
That state of calm clarity and effortless flow. I love that image. It's something we can all aspire to, whether we're, seasoned GTD pros or just starting out.
Exactly. And it all starts with taking that first step.
So listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, we leave you with this. What's one small action you can take right now to experience just a little bit of that mind like water? Maybe it's, finally clearing off your desk. Maybe it's making a decision you've been putting off. Or maybe it's just, taking 5 minutes to do a brain dump, get it all out of your head. Whatever it is, embrace the power of GTD and see where it takes you. You might be surprised at how much lighter, how much freer, how much more focused you feel